Hello, this is the Dazzling One, and this week's discussion is on the criminalization of homelessness. On a single night in 2016, 549,928 people were experiencing homelessness in the United States. A majority, 68%, was staying in emergency shelters, transitional housing programs, or safe havens, and 32% were in unsheltered locations. Over 1/5 of people experiencing homelessness were children. 69% were over the age of 24, and 9% were between the ages of 18 and 24. Between 2015 and 2016, the number of people experiencing homelessness declined by 3%. Declines were composed entirely of people staying in sheltered locations. Homelessness increased among people staying in unsheltered locations by 2%. Some common reasons for homelessness are poverty, unemployment. This can include someone who just got out of prison and can't find employment. A sad fact of the American society is that these drug laws from the war on drugs have contributed to a higher prison population and has especially impacted the Black community. And people who go to prison once they get out of jail just have a harder time finding work in general, and this can lead to homelessness, or worse, they go back to committing more crimes, and it's a vicious cycle. Another factor is the lack of affordable housing, poor physical or mental health, drug and alcohol abuse, gambling. When I was on my way to Los Angeles, we took a road trip, and just driving through Las Vegas and noticing all of the homeless people on the sides of the road, most I assume from gambling, it's just another harsh reality. Family and relationship breakdown, domestic violence, and women's shelters is another place where one can stay and be considered homeless. I actually for a time did temporarily stay there as a child, so I understand a little bit about the homelessness process from that perspective, but that's a story for another time. And one thing that angers me about the domestic violence, sexual assault, and child abuse system is that once a kid hits 18, and usually this is in foster care, they get booted out and they're left to fend for themselves, and some people, after they turn 18, end up homeless from that as well. Physical or sexual abuse, that would be like childhood runaways, are all factors. So you would think that in a just society, in a society where everything is all about social justice, and we constantly hear people shouting about how they want to create this sort of utopia, that homelessness would be met with empathy, but sadly, over the past 25 years, cities across the country have penalized people who are forced to carry out life-sustaining activities on the street and in public spaces, despite the fact communities lack adequate affordable housing and shelter space. One girl in my institutions and social action class I took last semester, we had a project where we had to go to a agency and volunteer and also interview whoever headed the place. I chose a women's shelter, but one girl in my class chose a homeless shelter, and she was saying how when she went to volunteer that the number of homeless people were growing, and some of the people that once worked at the shelter were now becoming members of the shelter, and they were running out of space and they didn't have much funding. And this is a big problem, is there actually are more laws being created to criminalize the homeless than there are shelters being created to house the homeless, and even the shelters just lack funding, volunteers, and that can lead to a dangerous, toxic environment within shelters. Criminalization measures that punish homelessness and activities necessary to survive on the street are counterproductive to ending homelessness. Associated fines and criminal records provide greater barriers for many to becoming rehoused and often perpetuate negative sentiments towards people who are homeless. U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness has strongly advised local governments not to enact laws criminalizing homelessness because they create additional barriers for homeless people, fail to increase access to services, and undermine the impact of service providers. The criminalization of homelessness refers to measures that prohibit life-sustaining activities such as sleeping, camping, eating, sitting, and or asking for money, resources in public spaces. These ordinances include criminal penalties for violations of these acts. And I'm going to read to you some of the measures in which they take and give you the stats on them. So a common way in which they criminalize homelessness is carrying out sweeps. which include confiscating personal property, including tents, bedding, papers, clothing, medications, in city areas where homeless people live. According to the NLCHP, which surveyed the ordinances of 187 cities for the last 10 years, among these cities, 33% prohibit camping in public city-wide. 50% prohibit camping in particular public spaces. Another way in which homeless people get in trouble is they make it illegal to sleep in public spaces or in a vehicle. 18% of cities prohibit sleeping in public citywide. 27% prohibit sleeping in particular public spaces. 39% prohibit living in vehicles. 47% prohibit sitting and lying down in particular public spaces. Another way in which homelessness is made a crime is making panhandling illegal. 27% prohibit panhandling citywide. 61% prohibit panhandling in particular public places. Making it illegal for groups to share food with homeless people in public spaces is another way in which homeless people are penalized, enforcing a quality of life ordinance relating to public activity and hygiene, and making loitering illegal. 32% of cities have citywide prohibitions on loitering, loafing, and vagrancy. And the prevalence of these laws, particularly citywide prohibitions, have dramatically increased over the past 10 years. Since 2006, citywide bans on loitering, loafing, and vagrancy increased by 88%. Sitting and lying down in certain public spaces increased by 52%. Panhandling grew by 43%, and camping increased by 69%. Sleeping in public increased by 31%. What's even more messed up about these laws that criminalize homelessness is that it violates their constitutional rights as American citizens. The First Amendment protects free speech, but there are laws restricting speech like begging targets speech based on content or does not allow for alternative channels of communication. It violates their Fourth Amendment right, which protects them from unreasonable search and seizure. Law enforcement is allowed to destroy a homeless person's belongings. It violates their Eighth Amendment right, which protects them from cruel and unusual punishment, because many times a criminal penalty is imposed upon them or they're unable to engage in necessary life-sustaining activities. And lastly, it violates their 14th Amendment, which protects citizenship, due process, and equal protection. And the way this is violated is with vague statutes which do not give a person notice of prohibited conduct and encourage arbitrary enforcement. Sadly, a criminal record adds to the already difficult situation of finding employment, getting housing, or being eligible for certain services. Additionally, the criminalization of homelessness adds to an already overburdened criminal justice system by detaining individuals who have not committed serious crimes. One night in jail costs 3 times more on average than a shelter, and law enforcement is both unprepared and incapable of handling homelessness and related issues. This is a bit unrelated, but I just want to say this really quick. Another issue too with a lot of this homelessness and with those that are mentally ill is apparently cops have received little to no training most times with how to handle mentally ill individuals. And this is a moral issue. By punishing someone for carrying out life-sustaining activities in public where there are no alternatives, people who are already suffering are being punished further for suffering. Additionally, the criminalization of homelessness is aimed at the visual ramifications of homelessness, not the root causes. Not only does it fail to address the underlying causes, but it further undermines the challenges of homelessness. So, one other thing I want to say before I get to some possible solutions to this problem is that often on my channel and on other channels that focus more on conspiracy theories is that we talk about the out-of-sight rich, but hardly have I spoken about the out-of-sight poor, which are the homeless. And they are a part of society, but in many ways they aren't. And it's just disgusting that they're punished for being in the boat they're in the first place. And I understand sometimes people can place themselves in a compromising situation which can lead to homelessness. But when you have people who have lost their jobs, who have been through a rough situation, and they end up on the street, and it's not easy on the street for many of these people. Many of them are jumped, robbed of the little they have. I've heard stories of them being harassed or having water or soda poured on them. An interesting YouTube channel I came across recently was Invisible People, and the guy who heads the channel was homeless himself for a time, and he goes around interviewing homeless people across the country and raising awareness of this issue. So if you're interested in more of this sort of information, or looking for ways to help, then I recommend going to his YouTube channel, and I can provide a link in the description box below for his channel as well. But some solutions to dealing with the criminalization of homelessness is by trying to reverse these laws. And it's a very difficult process because many statewide homeless Bill of Rights have been passed or are being considered that provide alternatives to criminalization and protection of the civil rights of people experiencing homelessness. However, there's still laws that do exactly the opposite. Another way in which we can help as citizens is simply to, if we know of a shelter, provide funding to a shelter, or even for those who have the time or the heart, because you need both, is to even take time to volunteer. That's one thing that I'm a big advocate of, is volunteering if you have the time or the heart or the energy, because I know some people work. They don't have time for themselves or their family, and I understand. But for those of us who have a little bit more time on our hands, it's always good to help those in our immediate community. There's nothing wrong with exposing the evils of this world and being concerned with people across the world or with situations going on in different cities. But I also believe that the people nearest to us should be helped or looked after. And I heard a lot of people talking about situations like Pizzagate, and I do believe such things are very possible and are very real, and there definitely are pedophile rings. What about helping children in your local community who are victims of sexual abuse or child abuse and offering your services, or maybe if you don't have time, offering donations or funds? That's up to you, but I just wanted to share this piece of information with you because the criminalization of homelessness is a very real thing in the United States, and I don't see it getting better anytime soon, but the little we can do can definitely go a long way. Thank you for watching. I hope you have a wonderful week. Take care, and God bless.